Hi there, everyone. Welcome to The Daily Gardener. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's July 26th. Have you ever tried to propagate roses by cutting? Maybe you want to pass along an old rose from a friend, or simply make more of your own. You can take a cutting of your rose, which is also called a slip. When it comes to selecting the right stem, I look for a long, young shoot. These new shoots are about the diameter of a pencil, and they've grown from spots that I've pruned earlier in the year, which is another benefit of pruning. Now, these shoots are pretty easy to spot. They're usually a little lighter in color, and they're super vigorous. Anyway, you want to cut one long shoot down low, and then make your hardwood slips from that one long shoot. If you look at the long stem you just cut, you'll notice that at the very top, the stem is pliable, meaning that you can bend it quite easily. But as you go further down the stem, you'll begin to notice that the soft pliability goes away, and then all you're left with is what we call hardwood. That's where you're going to take your cuttings. So from one long stem, I can usually get 3 or 4 5 to 7 inch cuttings. So bottom line, don't take your cutting from a stem that's bendable. Now, how do you cut? When you make your slips, use something sharp. It can be a knife or a pruner. When you're cutting the bottom part of the cutting, cut straight across, right below a bud. A bud is where the leaves connect to the stem. For the top of your slip, cut at an angle right above a bud. Using those bud connection points as guides for cutting is important because this is where loads of non-determinant cells like to hang out. And that means that the plants can leverage those cells to make either roots or shoots, depending on what it needs to do to survive. Pretty cool, huh? Then I just strip the leaves from the lower 4 inches of the stem. Next, I trim some of the bark from the bottom inch or so of the cutting, making it rather squarish, kind of like a mint stem. And then I dip that into rooting hormone. Finally, place the bottom 3 to 4 inches of your cutting into well-drained potting soil in the ground, and then cover the slip with a mason jar. That's it. Here's today's brevities. It's the birthday of Roland Hallet Shumway, who was born on this day in 1842. He was the pioneering seedsman out of Rockford, Illinois, and he always went by his initials of RH. The RH Shumway Seed Company became the world's largest mail-order seed company. Famous Shumway seed customers included Bing Crosby and Perry Como. Once Shumway was asked how he'd like to be remembered, he gave a 3-word response: good seeds cheap. Shumway said that he wanted to make sure that the good seeds were within reach of the poorest planters. As with any venture, sweat equity drives success. Shumway said, "My industrious employees work 16 hours a day, and myself and my family 18 or more hours per day. Do we not deserve the patronage of every planter in America?" And it's the 120th anniversary of the 14-week botanical expedition through Yellowstone, led by the botanist Aven Nelson. Aven had hired a student named Leslie Gooding to be the chore boy for $10 a month. The group had been assembled at the University of Wyoming, where Nelson had been hired to teach. Leslie remembered the excitement, saying some 3 or 4 months were to be spent in Yellowstone collecting plants. In addition to Leslie, another botany student named Elias Nelsen joined the group. on this day in 1899, Leslie and Elias had gone collecting near an area in Yellowstone called Artist Paint Pots. It's a dangerous area with over 50 springs, geysers, vents, and mud pots. To this day, park rangers rescue one or two people each year who wander off paths and punch their feet through the thin earthen crust into boiling water with temps as high as 220 degrees Fahrenheit. Drawn by curiosity, that's exactly what happened to Elias. He suddenly found himself with one leg sunk into boiling hot mud. He managed to free himself. When they finally reached a doctor at the nearest town, he recommended Elias return home for treatment. Despite the challenges posed by Yellowstone, Nelson and his team collected roughly 30,000 specimens, although Nelson had purposely gathered 20 to 30 duplicates per species because he correctly assumed that institutions and collectors would want specimens from Yellowstone. Today, Nelson is remembered as the father of Wyoming botany, but his greatest legacy is the Rocky Mountain Herbarium created from his collection of Yellowstone plants. In Unearthed Words, here's a few verses about July from a poem by Ruth called The Diehards. We go in withering July to ply the hard, incessant hoe. Panting beneath the brazen sky, we sweat and grumble, but we go. And today's book recommendation is The Rude Potato by Ruth Pitter. A gardener herself, Ruth had personal knowledge of flowers. The Rude Potato is a witty, entertaining collection of poems about gardens and gardeners. One of my favorites. Today's garden chore is to work early and stay cool. To avoid the high temps, potential sunburn, and bug bites, I go out in the morning. For self-care, I set up a sports umbrella for shade, and I bring a large fan around with me to stay cool. And let me tell you, that extension cord is going on for about 40 feet in some spots. The fan also keeps the bugs at bay, and lucky for us, mosquitoes are not good flyers, so that fan serves two purposes. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the birthday of Winthrop Mackworth Praed. Praed was an English writer and politician, remembered for his humorous verse. He wrote, I remember how my childhood fleeted by, the mirth of its December and the warmth of its July. Praed's home had a grove. He had an orangery and beautiful grounds overlooking a harbor. Praed tragically died at 37 from tuberculosis. For many years, his fans enjoyed this little story about him. A man went to a bookshop and asked, "Have you Browning?" The clerk replied, "No, we can't sell him. People say they can't understand him." Then the customer asked, "Have you prayed?" And the clerk said, "Yes, we've prayed, and we can't understand him." Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced weekdays in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. You can find complete show notes over at thedailygardener.org, and be sure to share the show with your garden friends. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. While you're over at Facebook, don't forget to join the Daily Gardener community. Just search for these 3 words, Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop right up, and then request to join. Finally, I want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, where my fabulous editor is Eric Begay. Have a great weekend in the garden, and we'll see you on Monday.